Thanks for joining. So for the next hour, we're going to be talking about tech sales with Shift Group. So just a quick breakdown on the agenda. So for the first 15 minutes, we're going to be talking about what is tech sales, typical career path. So that'd be SDR, BDR, ISR, AE. JR is going to tell us about how he got into the role. I'll share a little bit of background in terms of how I got in as well. What makes tech sales a good career move, and of course, what everyone wants to know: how much money can you actually make within this career? That'll be the first 15 minutes. So it's tech sales overview. The next 15 minutes, we're gonna be focused on Shift Group. So Shift Group is sponsoring this live. One of my newest partners on the channel. So super excited. We're going to be learning about the story behind Shift Group, what types of candidates typically go to Shift Group, what's the typical process for athletes that choose to work with Shift Group, why should someone consider working with Shift Group over some of the other options, and then how does Shift Group ultimately set up candidates for success. So first 30 minutes is going to be, we're going to kind of curate it. It'll be back and forth mostly between JR and I, and then for the last 30 minutes, it's going to be an open Q&A. So super excited, and this will be posted on YouTube as well, recorded after the fact. It might be a couple hours or so for it to get processed. So if you don't end up catching everything, I'll post up the recording too. Perfect. So we'll go ahead and get started. So TechSalesTom here, JR Butler from Shift Group. So super excited to have you on, JR, and spend time talking about tech sales and what makes you guys different.
Pumped to be here, buddy.
Yeah, perfect. So let's go ahead and, the first topic is, what is tech sales, right? So if you follow me, you probably have a good idea, but, there's a ton of different companies that would fall under tech sales. The way I personally categorize it is selling typically software, business to business, as opposed to business to consumer. So when you think about like car sales or insurance sales, that's business to consumer. It's more of a high volume type selling motion, lower contract value, lower sales price. You're selling directly to other individuals. B2B sales is very different. It's almost like more on like a consultative type approach in my experience. So you're selling complex software solutions. You don't have to be a developer. You're working on a team. You have other technical folks that will work with you to help close the deal. And then, these deals can be, fairly large in size and several millions of dollars, depending on what you're selling, all the way down to like, 10 to 15K per deal. And they'll take, usually several weeks or several months to close. So very different type of selling motion than traditional sales when people think about sales. Anything you want to add there, JR, in terms of your short pitch on what tech sales is?
Yeah, the way I think about technology sales is you're really helping companies solve business problems with software or with technology. It could be services, hardware, software combined. So you're really trying to figure out ways to help companies be more efficient, drive whether it's better profits or less costs. And I really think of selling software as convincing people to change the way they're currently doing things into a new way. So I really think of it as selling change more than anything else. It just happens. I think at a high level, you hit the good details around it being business to business, larger deals that take longer. But ultimately, the reason people spend money on software is because it drives business value for their company. And that's really, as a technology salesperson, that's what you need to understand is the business more than the tech.
Yeah, that's a great distinction, right? Because a lot of times when people think about like traditional sales or car sales or insurance sales or life insurance sales, it's typically it's like more high pressure. There's like some like psychological techniques that the sales reps will use versus in tech sales, it really is about selling that value. Typically companies are going to be comparing multiple vendors, multiple solutions. So you're not going to be able to just, bully the customer into buying it. There's multiple decision makers typically involved, and it's a much more methodical process than you working one-on-one trying to sell just to an individual person. So next piece, the typical career path. What's the typical career path in tech sales? So the tech sales career path is pretty broad, but at a high level in terms of where people typically start. So you're going to be starting off as a sales development representative or a business development representative. People will get hired into these roles with no prior tech experience, and nowadays even with no formal college education. You learn pretty much everything on the job. It's a role that's meant to be transitionary, so people usually are in this role for 12 to 24 months, assuming solid performance. And what you're doing in this role is you're often like the first touch for prospective customers. So you'll have a mix of customers either reaching out to your company that are wanting to like learn more about the product, and you're going to go ahead and qualify that need and create an opportunity. We'll get into that a little bit later. And then there's also an aspect of outbound prospecting. So that would be like what people consider like cold calling, but it doesn't have to be just calling. It could be emailing, it could be LinkedIn messages, and also calling, of course. So that's like that entry level role. So you're kind of covering that beginning part of the sales process. Once you graduate from that, you would then move into, usually sometimes for the bigger companies, they'll have an inside sales representative position. So that's a closing role. So you're going to be taking those deals, those opportunities that the SDR has qualified or initially identified, and then you're going to go ahead and take that to close. So there's a whole sales process you'll be going through. And then from there, you get graduated up into an account executive. So that's like the field selling type role. In this role, you'll potentially do more travel. You'll be in front of the customer. You'll own an entire territory, and it's like running your own book of business. And then it goes from there even further. You have different levels of management and so on. But that's kind of like the main. That's where you might expect to spend like the first 4 to 5 years within your tech sales career. Yeah. So next question is, how, I get this question a lot is, how did you even get into tech sales in the first place? Well, a lot of people haven't heard of this career before. This is why I actually created the channel, just to spread some more awareness, because I myself kind of almost fell into it by accident. I wrote off kind of sales completely initially because I had like that stigma of kind of like the high pressure sales reps. So when I started in like technical support, that's when I started in the tech industry. I had no interest in moving into sales at all, but then I started to shadow some folks, and I learned that it was very different than what I expected. So my path, I started on the technical support side, started exploring some internal options for my career path, and then actually really ended up like really enjoying the tech sales side. So I started off as an SDR, moved into an inside sales rep, and then I've done a couple positions, sales engineer, account executive. I've done both of those for bigger companies and smaller companies. But JR, how did you get into tech sales?
I was applying for law school, and somebody basically talked me out of it and said, "Hey, you're going to work 100 hours a week. You're going to graduate with a ton of debt." And I was a sociology major with a minor in art history and sign language when I graduated and stopped playing hockey. So I didn't really have any marketable skills. So I thought that law school was the only way. I think I'm a little older than you, Tom. So it was like the early 2000s when technology was really starting to blow up. And I basically met a guy in a hockey locker room who told me that if I did it, I could make $300,000 within 3 years. That was enough to get me to at least get started. And then as soon as I started it, I fell in love with it. It was a perfect fit for my characteristics and my behaviors personally. And I haven't looked back since.
That's awesome. Yeah, and we'll go into that a little bit more in terms of like what makes athletes such a good fit for this career. But that's essentially what JR is doing with Shift Group. So we'll definitely go into that into more detail on the second section. But people always ask like, what makes this like a good career move? Like, is this really just like a one and done type job, and it's just a stopgap for something better? So for me, there's a couple of reasons why I think tech sales can be a really rewarding career path out of all the different career paths you can do. So one, working in the tech industry has a ton of benefits. So all of like a lot of the major tech companies, they're really kind of like paving the way in terms of economic growth. So you're able to join like these cutting edge companies. You're working with cool technology. The income potential is extremely high within the career. You get to travel, you get to be in front of customers, you get to like work with the tech without actually having to code. So, a lot of times people think you have to be a software developer to work in the tech industry. Not really the case. And there's also a lot of different career paths you can take. So you don't have to stay in a selling role. I've seen senior sellers, they end up moving into like marketing, into business development. They move, maybe they decide they do want to move into a more technical role. You can do that, or you move into product management. And then the selling skills that you develop as a sales rep will, make you a strong seller or strong, in basically any of those career paths, because no matter where you end up taking your career, you're going to continuously be selling and trying to solve problems, whether it be for internal stakeholders or for other customers. What's your take, JR, in terms of what makes this a great career move? Obviously, you've had a great career yourself over the past 15 years or so.
I think obviously the lucrative nature of it in terms of how much money you can make, it affords a lot of other freedoms like anything else. That's a huge piece to it. But I also think it's essentially, getting into technology sales is like getting your business degree. You learn a lot about the way companies operate, the way they make decisions, how they measure success, how they measure failure. And if you get, far along in your career and you work on, exciting and big deals at exciting and big companies, you end up learning a lot about business. And I think, you said it, you refine skills that you can use in every part of your life, right? Understanding how businesses operate is a huge skill to have, no matter what you want to go on and do. If you want to go into marketing, HR, finance, that's critical. Understanding how people think and what motivates them, and understanding how to influence them. I mean, that's meaningful for everything, right? In your relationships, in your your family. Like the ability to influence people is huge. And I also think, being able to understand complex concepts and explain them simply is something that's forgotten a lot as a technology salesperson. That's a pretty important skill to have in your life as well, especially as you get older. So I think all those things, plus, the work-life balance combined with your ability to travel and work from anywhere, it's a really good combination of things that make it an awesome career.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, now that I think about it, I think my favorite thing probably about like the career and the role itself is that you almost have like a one-to-one correlation in terms of like how much you get paid and the effort that you put in. So like when I think back, like when I was in like the tech support side, if I put in like double the effort compared to my peers, I would maybe get like a 10% larger bonus or something like that. Like it was a pretty rigid like pay structure. Like you had like your set tasks you need to do. You could do extra stuff, but you're not necessarily going to get paid for it because you're not directly tied to the revenue. So within sales, you're as close to the revenue as you can get. So it's very easy to justify getting higher payouts and then higher commissions. So if you actually do put in like double or triple the work and you blow out your quota, you get rewarded extremely well, especially with accelerators where they start paying you actually at like multiples of what you normally would get from a commission perspective. And last question. We had a couple comments here. How much money can you make within the role? So the pay goes up quite a bit as you move up in tenure and you move up the career path. So when you start off as a sales development representative, typically it's between 50 to 80K on target earnings. So what makes this tech sales different than like other sales roles is base salary is a very big component. When you first start off, you're kind of on usually like a 70-30 or 80-20 split, meaning from that $50,000 to $80,000 on target earnings, that's how much you would earn if you hit 100% of your goal. 70 to 80% is a guaranteed base. So it makes the pay very stable. You don't have as much of like the up and downs as like real estate, for example, where you're only making money if you're closing deals, and if you have a bad month, you literally don't take home any money at that point. Within these roles, when you move up to like the enterprise level, for example, base salaries will get to 150K or more, and then you also get stock grants as well. So at the enterprise level, that would be 4 to 6 years down your career path, assuming you're performing well. People are earning about 250 to 300K on target earnings. That's just base and commission. And then you also have stock options if it's a startup that hasn't gone public yet, or stock grants. And then top performers at these companies at the enterprise level, they're pulling close to $1 million, if not over $1 million, when they have like really strong years. So quick overview on tech sales. I have more content on my own page, and of course on Shift Group has some great content too in terms of like an overview on the industry. For the next 15 minutes, we're going to be going over specifically about Shift Group, because there is the special guest here today with JR. So wanted to go ahead and start off with, what's the story behind Shift Group, JR?
Yeah, and I'll keep it short for everyone because I know they come to get their questions answered, Tom. So I think we can get through it in shorter than 15 minutes. But Shift Group is a simple concept. I started the company for myself. I was an athlete. I played high level of hockey, both at college and a little bit after. And when I retired from hockey, I was a lost puppy. It was a really hard transition for me. If anybody knows hockey players, we're all psychos that think we're going to play in the NHL and it becomes our entire identity. And when I lost it, I was in a bad place until I found tech sales. I got that team camaraderie back. I got that competitive everyday competition back. I got that everyday growth back. I got that, ability to put work ethic in and see results back. And I got that mentoring and coaching that I had my entire life. So it changed my life, like literally saved my life. I was getting bad with drugs and alcohol, and then technology sales was kind of what I was able to pour myself back into. And then I had I got pretty lucky in my career. I had some success as an individual contributor, and then I joined a very early stage company out of Boston when it was about $1 million in revenue, less than 20 people. And we took off like a rocket ship. In 6 years, we grew the business to $200 million. I got to grow and go on that career path that you just talked about, Tom, in a much more accelerated way. Moved into a manager, director, VP, and then I ran strategy and operations for the whole business. And we sold the company to IBM for $2 billion. And my job was building sales teams. So I always looked for resilient, competitive, and coachable people. That was kind of how my core beliefs were, that, people that could be good sellers. And I think as an athlete, I knew I had those things. And I think most elite athletes are going to be those types of people. So when I started this company, I started it because I wish it existed when I was an athlete trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I also wish it existed when I was a VP of sales trying to hire 400 people in a year. So the company's for both 22-year-old JR and 35-year-old JR. That's really why it started. And I also did this for free for a long time in my network of hockey players. I get a phone call every week from somebody that was retiring from hockey, basically being like, JR, you're not that smart. You've made a ton of money. How do I get into your industry? And I'd help them just like you do, Tom. And I realized that these companies would be interested in partnering with me to get access to these athletes. We expanded quickly out of hockey when we started the business. We just officially launched it 60 days ago, but we've helped over 120 athletes make the transition into technology sales. And we partner with over 50 software companies around the United States to do it.
That's awesome. Great story. Yeah, I mean, there's just a ton of demand here, and then really like that's why I kind of started doing the channel too. I kind of stumbled in. It seems like you kind of stumbled in as well, and it's a great career path. I think there's a lot of people out there that would be a great fit for it. It's just I think there's a bit of an awareness kind of piece where people don't even realize that this career like is actually out there, that they might be a good fit for it. And that, a lot of downstream effects there. I've done a couple of videos on there from like impacts on like diversity and equity and everything. So I know that's a big thing that JR is also focused on as well. So we kind of touched on this, the types of candidates that go to Shift Group. So JR, so it's mostly it's all athletes at this point, right? Both, I guess, collegiate athletes, even potentially high school athletes if they don't go to the college level, and I assume retired professional athletes too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Anybody who's played sports at an elite level, college, professional. We placed several Olympians. We placed NHL, NFL, Major League Baseball retirees, but we've also placed Division III student athletes. Anybody that can handle the workload of school as well as play a sport and, earn the right to put, your school's name on the front of your jersey means you're a special person and you're a good fit for Shift Group. That elite athlete is really what we go for. And we've also started helping veterans too. I saw that question in the chat there. We do have a veterans program as well because very similar characteristics.
Nice. Yep. Awesome. And then we got a couple questions here, like high school athletes. Actually, I've had quite a few people reach out to me who they either, let's say, dropped out of college or they decided not to pursue it for a variety of different reasons, but maybe they were very strong high school athletes playing on the varsity team. Have you worked with those types of folks as well?
Yeah, I think if you have a personal story where you've overcome adversity, where you can explain how how competition motivates you, how your work ethic has played out in your life, and how you've been coachable. I think that's the story we're looking to tell these customers, these companies that we work with. So, there's plenty of high school athletes that can tell those stories of resiliency, competitiveness, and coachability. So, that's definitely an opportunity as well.
Awesome. And then I think this ties into it too, like how technical is tech sales? Like, I'm sure there are probably people who are like, hey, like, I'm not really like a tech guy. I don't know if I could be selling this stuff. In my experience, you're not expected to be the technical expert. You'll get training. You need to be able to talk to it at a high level, but you're definitely not going to be coding or anything like that unless you end up, like, let's say, deciding to become like a sales engineer or a solutions architect. But that's a kind of a different career path. Would you agree with that, JR?
Yeah, I saw a question earlier, Tom, when we were chatting. Somebody asked what coding language I know, and I kind of laughed.
Yeah.
I'm a perfect example of the need to not be technical. I've been doing this for 15 years. I got up to becoming a chief revenue officer in my last role before I started Shift Group, and I did not own a computer in college, and I still need help turning my computer on now. So the need to be technical is not there whatsoever, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yep. And that's what draws to me too. Actually, I think I tried I tried learning software development when I was like in my first role, and then I realized it wasn't just for me. I couldn't just be coding all day. Totally different day in the life compared to like more on the business side. So don't need to worry about that. Great question here would be, what's the typical process for athletes that work with you? Let's say like they reach out and they sign up. What does that process look like?
Yeah, so I think we take an athlete. We have coaches that are dedicated to working with the athletes. A couple of them are on here right now, and they're phenomenal. They both have athletic backgrounds, and they're both, our business is structured so that we're really only compensated if we get people jobs. We don't charge athletes or our candidates anything. So we're literally incentivized to maximize the opportunity for our candidates. So you work directly with a coach, and we have an online learning management system that you run through. And we kind of hit all the high notes, right? As a VP of sales for a decade, I know exactly what type of skills the companies that are hiring out there are looking for. We give you a full industry overview, an understanding of the tech sales, a lot of the same stuff that Tom, you hit on a daily basis.
Last question, maybe we'll just repeat it pretty quickly. So, in terms of like how you guys work with athletes, so if I understand, you guys work like an agent, right? So there's no charge for the athletes. You're working on their behalf to basically get them a contract and get them a deal. And then you guys basically get a cut of that. So there's no income share agreements. There's no boot camp price or anything that you're paying there.
Exactly. It's the only difference between us and an agent. An agent gets a percentage of the player's contract. We get paid by the company 100%. So the candidate makes what they make, and then we get a percentage of that from the company. So we're, like I said, we're incentivized to maximize the offer that they all get.
Yeah. And for people that don't know, like if you're not in the tech industry, anytime like actually like a recruiter reaches out to you like on LinkedIn or anything, that's essentially like how they operate too. Like companies are used to paying this for like the recruiting or for the placement firm, and there's absolutely no impact on like your pay itself. I guess it's pretty close to like if you're buying a house, then you use an agent, right? Like the seller is paying for your agent for the most part. So in this case, the tech companies are paying JR to kind of coach and train you guys and get you placed because it's in their best interest too. Great. And then last question, and then of course we'll have these other Q&As. Maybe we'll take this question here. Are technical sales specialists more technical than account managers but less technical than SEs? So that's a great question. So I like this question because there are so many variations on titles within tech sales roles across different organizations. Like a technical sales specialist, I think like Microsoft uses that. Those are like equivalent to account executives. And then you look at places like AWS. There's so many different titles there, but that would almost be more of like an overlay role where you're focused on a very specific product. So you almost can't go by the title themselves. You really have to like dig into like the job description. That's where you're focused on an individual product and you're covering multiple territories and reps. This one is a good question. I like this one. How diverse is tech sales? Because this is great in terms of why we've got JR here. But you can look at the big companies will put out their diversity reports, like Google. They do their annual diversity and inclusion reports. And they do breakdowns based on different business segments. And last I looked, actually, like the non-engineering roles, which would fall under like sales and the other business roles, actually is fairly more diverse than the engineering roles themselves. There still is a lot of room to grow in terms of making the entire sales force as diverse as like, let's say like the general population, but and that's where like I'm trying to basically spread as much awareness that I can, working with other reps that come from underrepresented backgrounds to do some additional coaching and mentoring within their hometowns. And JR, I know you had some pretty impressive stats in terms of the diversity of like the athletes that you're working with and the placement of those.
Yeah, over 50% of our candidates are females and people of color. And you're right, Tom. There's a lot of work that software companies have to do to catch up to the population. And I think the good thing is that they're trying, and it is something that they're actively looking for. It's one of the reasons that a lot of our company customers work with us is because they know that they can get diverse candidates from our pipeline. And it's one of the reasons I started the company is I don't come from a family that you would think would end up at a company that sold for $2 billion. So, I've changed my life, my family's life because I got into tech sales. So I love being able to do that for other people from underrepresented areas and backgrounds. It's a huge piece of what we do. And it's a huge piece of what companies are looking to do in the future, for sure.
Yeah. That's awesome. It's definitely improving, I would say. And then, I think it's only going to get better. I've had several female managers and directors, and I think the diversity is actually really great, just to bring in different viewpoints. So it's definitely encouraged. It's not. I think sales used to be. I did a video on it. Used to be like more of like kind of like a good old boys club, but it's very different nowadays. And then still, obviously still improving. But I think it's you'll hopefully feel welcomed, depending on which company and team you join. One other question I had for you, JR. Actually, I don't know do I still have you, JR? You're kind of frozen on my screen here.
I'm still here.
Okay, I think you might be frozen on mine. If you want to just toggle your video on and off. I think maybe mine did the same thing too. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So perfect. So I guess last question we had on like the agenda that we didn't get to yet was what how does Shift Group specifically like set up their candidates for success? And like what's made you guys so successful to date?
I think a lot of it has to do with the training that we built. We're not a bunch of recruiters that started a recruiting company for athletes. We're athletes and sales leaders that started a company to help companies hire the right candidates. And I think that's why we're different. We know, I've only been in this business for 9 months. I've been in sales leadership and software companies for 15 years. And I've been an athlete for 37. So I think that's really what makes us different is we understand how you tick and we understand how the companies tick and we understand how the decision makers at those companies tick that are going to give you offers. So I think our content, our curriculum is really unique and there are lots of really good offerings out there that can help you get into tech sales. I don't think we're for everybody, but I think if you have the opportunity to do it, you should. But I think that's our biggest differentiator is our experiences as sales leaders and as athletes more than anything else.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that like in the messaging and like the way that you guys like I guess post like your placements and stuff. I think is really cool, really unique. Really kind of like taking like that sports kind of like placement type model, which I think it's really cool, and it just paints like this overall picture, which I think probably the companies that you work with probably really enjoy as well. Yeah. So here's a good question or interesting one. I got a couple. Yeah. So during an internship, who should you make connections and network with to learn about new roles? So great question. Yeah, internships very important. I always recommend for college students to pursue internships when they can. I didn't, because I was helping out my parents with their small business during the summers, which I think it obviously was great to help out family, but definitely put me a little bit behind in terms of developing industry connections. But you should be reaching out to various managers across different departments that you're interested in. So if you definitely want to be in sales, talk to different sales managers, talk to some of like the senior sellers, make connections with them. Everyone that I've talked to within the companies that I've been at have been like super friendly to at least grab time. And then, so that's really kind of like the level I would say to be, that you should be focusing on. And then you could, depending on the company, the size of the company, if it's like a really big company, you might have, trouble getting like director or VP level attention. But if it's a smaller company, you'd be surprised at how open people will be. This is a good question here. Also, is moving from AWS to a smaller company like Jordan Belfort, moving from Rothschild to Investa Center? So I'll do my take in the jam, or you could have yours, but I don't know if it's like there's pros and cons to bigger companies and smaller companies. You can, the way that I see it is if when you're at a big company like AWS or Google or Microsoft, like you'll consistently make a lot of money, but you won't have like the really big upside of like joining a small company and being there while they're growing from like, let's say to Google to like make like a ton of money. Like you'll make a lot of money, but you're not going to make like, like crazy startup IPO type money. Like I had a buddy who he joined Snowflake a year before they went public, and he was considering Snowflake and then Google Cloud. Very similar offers in terms of like the stock and everything. But he ended up going with Snowflake. It ended up being a good move. Like his it was like $150K in equity that they gave him. After a year, just a year when they went public, it was worth like almost $4 million. So like that's the type of upside that you won't see in a relatively short period of time at a big company. So anything you want to add there, JR, in terms of that question?
Yeah, well, one distinction I want to make is just because like Investa Center was like selling penny stocks versus like, they were selling blue chip stocks at the other company. And I think one distinction to make is just because a company's small doesn't mean it's worse. Mm-hmm. It just means it has a lot of, like you said, it has a lot of room to grow, right? Mm-hmm. The company that I was at, we went from 15 people to 700 people in 6 years, and we got bought by one of the most iconic technology companies in the world. Yeah. And they spent $2 billion on us. Like, just to put that in perspective for everybody, IBM has 300,000 global employees. They spend $6 billion a year on research and development, right? That's more than the United States spends on cancer research. And they had to spend $2 billion on our company, which was 700 people in Boston. We only raised $100 million, and they couldn't figure out the technology that we built with 300,000 people and a $6 billion R&D budget. So like, we definitely were an investor center, right? Like, so I think of that upside when I think of small to big, the opportunity to grow with the company, the opportunity to, you know, they don't give you a quota like you're growing 200% year over year. They would lose reps every year. Mm-hmm. So the way quotas are structured at fast growth companies are the same as they are at the big companies. And then you can have the opportunity where you get a 20% lift on your quota and a 300% lift in your territory. And now all of a sudden you're W-2ing 7 figures multiple years in a row, right? Mm-hmm. And like you said, that doesn't typically happen in a bigger company. It's just, they don't grow that way. They can't. Yeah. They already own too much market share.
Exactly. And like the bigger ones, like especially, you know, they'll build out like a pretty robust like sales compensation team. Like they dial in the quotas like pretty well. So like you might have like a couple big quarters, but like definitely it would be hard to like really blow out your quota year over year like you potentially can at a high growth startup. But also one other thing to add on the comment about like Investa Center, right? There definitely are some sketchier startups in terms of like the product. So you might run into a position where like the product is like half there and you end up like, you know, the features that customers are looking for aren't quite there yet. So you kind of have to, you have to kind of walk the line of like actually selling what you potentially could deliver on, but then you also can be upfront, you know, with the customer saying that, you know, this is possible, we can go ahead and develop it. But then there are also some startups that aren't as like truthful. So that's part of like the research that you need to do and the due diligence to make sure that the product that they're selling can actually like deliver on the results. Because the last thing you want to do is be selling a product that doesn't work or is going to leave the customer unhappy.
I think Tom, I can kind of add to that a little bit because after we sold Turbonomic, I was offered a chief revenue officer job at about 10 different startups, and I evaluated the companies because you're right, there's sketchy companies out there. Mm-hmm. So I like to look at 8 categories, right? What's the size of the opportunity that the company's going after? Yep. What's the IP that they own that makes them win? What's the ROI that customers get? How quickly do customers get that ROI? Who's the buyer, right? Because you don't want to sell to 20 different divisions and 20 different economic buyers. What's the ASP? You don't want to go sell a $600 product, but you also don't want to have to sell a $15 million product. Yep. What's the competition? And then for the startup, it's about entry and exit value. When are you coming in and what's the potential exit path, right? Yep. And that kind of ties back to the size of the opportunity. So that's how I look at startups. That's how most investors, by the way, look at startups, is those 8 categories as well.
Yep. And that's so that's a really great set of criteria, and that's probably another really valuable reason in terms of like why people might want to work with Shift Group, right? Because you can bring that insight when you're kind of like vetting opportunities. Sometimes I've even run across it with like recruiters. Like recruiters will ping me on LinkedIn about, you know, random companies, random offers, and like they don't even really know that much about the company or the role themselves, right? They're kind of doing like a shotgun type approach, and you really don't know. Like they're actually, I mean, they're incentivized to get you in the role no matter what. They're salespeople essentially. They're selling a specific job, and you're the customer, or you're the, you know, what they're trying to close on, versus when you're working with someone like JR and his team at Shift Group, they're not like focused on one individual company. They're not just selling like individual position. So, you know, I'm not sure how many companies you're working with right now, but I'm sure it's probably a pretty large number of companies that have openings and stuff that you're looking to fill with your candidates, right?
Yeah, 50 plus companies. You're exactly right. Mm-hmm. And we dig into every one of them, so we try to prepare our candidates for it.
Yeah, because I'm sure also like the last thing you want to do is place athletes, hardworking athletes, in positions where they're just going to be set up to fail, because that's just not a win for anyone.
Right on.
Mm-hmm. Great. So other questions here. Thoughts on federal tech job salary negotiations. Is that route recession proof? Great question. So I know, JR, you probably do a lot of maybe salary negotiation on the behalf of on your reps, but any specific tips you think on like the federal side? I don't actually have too much experience on federal sales. I've always been on commercial. I briefly sold into a couple federal customers, but it wasn't like my primary focus. So curious what your thoughts are there in terms of strategies.
Yeah, I built the federal team at our last company for both the U.S. and Canada, and Canadian federal. You think the U.S. is bureaucratic? You guys should try to sell into Canada. Mm-hmm. But that being said, I think in a federal sales negotiation, you should, depending on your background, you should have more leverage, because in those types of sales roles, 80% of the sale is actually like understanding the paperwork process and the requirements and compliance that you have to follow in order to even get the deal, right? So, you know, the 20% is what you're actually selling and doing a job, and then 80% of it is understanding the blocking and tackling to get across a federal deal. So we overpaid for a lot of federal reps that have that experience. So if you're going for that role and you have that experience, you have leverage to negotiate that you should use 100%. And you can get a higher comp than a regular kind of rep role in a similar market, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah, very, very specialized. And I assume probably the same too, like if you end up getting a position where you get clearance, right, you know, depending on the types of contracts you're selling with, that's probably very, very, very valuable from a comp perspective too, right?
Yep, 100%.
Yeah. And then I've had like quite a few like veterans and military folks that I feel like at least when I was at Google, I knew a good number of people on the federal sales side. They actually had like prior military experience, and I'm not sure. I feel like that probably would, you know, maybe help them in the role to either like connect with the customers. There might be a good amount of overlap there, but have you seen that as well too?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just on the product side, but on the partner side.
Yeah.
The partners that sell into the federal government love hiring vets. Because you're right. There's a certain knowledge of how to navigate the language, the different departments. Like all those things really matter. And having that military background is a huge differentiator.
Awesome. Got another question here. Can you talk about salaries for renewal sales, not new sales, bringing back clients? Yep. So companies will they'll split up the sales role with an account executive and an account manager. So the account managers will be responsible for managing existing clients, doing renewals. So at like the bigger companies, comp is based on a leveling system. And for the most part, at least from the ones that I've been at, the pay is actually fairly similar on like the net new versus like the account management side, assuming you're at like the same level. But I have seen other companies where you do end up moving away from a 50-50 split to more of like a 70-30. So like your base salary might be the same, but then your potential commission or bonus will be lower. They might not even label it as a commission in some cases. It'll be a bonus. Is that what you've seen too, JR?
Yeah, 100%. And I do think you're typically measured on other KPIs as well, like net promoter score matters, product usage. Like, you know, he said bringing them back, so that kind of makes me think like they lost the customer and they have to go back and get them.
Yeah.
That's a little different than managing a successful customer and making them more successful.
Right.
It's kind of two different roles, you know?
Yep, for sure. Yeah, and there also might be, sometimes there's also like potential for upselling as well that might happen there. But yeah, I mean, it can vary though quite a bit. So you would need to kind of just dig in a bit more on the specific companies. Yeah, I mean, I also know some people who they enjoy that part of the sale more than others. So it also just comes down to preference. Like you don't need to always be on the pre-sale side or selling into new accounts. I think it's important to align your career with where your strengths lie and where your actual interests lie, because I think you're gonna end up making more in your career if you're in a role that better matches your personality and your skill set versus trying to like fit yourself into a role that you can't quite perform at, because then what will happen is you'll end up getting promoted quicker and moving up, and then any difference in like commission structures or so on will quickly be outweighed by the additional pay that you'll get, being in a higher level role in other parts of the organization. This one's a good one. I'll take you this one first, JR. What's the craziest sales story you have? And then maybe it won't be like too crazy, since this will be like reposted, so it'll be like kind of the so we don't get blocked or anything.
So this is it's a funny story. Before I joined the last company I was at, the startup, when I was a channel partner, I lost my driver's license because of speeding tickets in Boston. I'm a terrible driver, and I got like 6 tickets in like 3 months. But I was a regional reseller, so my customers were all over New England, all the way down to New York City. I put on average like 35,000 miles a year on my car, but I couldn't drive. So I had a roommate from when I played hockey, this kid from South Boston, who's like, if you look up like Southie and like, Goodwill Hunting, it's a picture of him. Like he wore like a Adidas jumpsuit, and he was looking for work. Yeah. So I hit him up and I was like, hey, can you drive me around for a few months until I get my license back? So I started taking him to meetings, and he started getting bored sitting out in my car during the meetings. And I was close with all my customers. As you know, Tom, as a reseller, you build like really good relationships. You're not just selling one product, you're selling them everything in their data center. This is like pre-cloud days, like 2009. Yeah. So I started having them come into the meetings with me, and like we would do a whiteboard for like a backup solution, and then the customer would look down at the end of the table and be like, hey, Kevin, like, what do you think of that? What do you think of this Avamar solution? He'd be like, looks sick, kid. So then I got my license back, and I started going back to meetings, and every single one of my customers asked if Kevin could come back to meetings because they missed him.
That's awesome. Sales can definitely get fun. I think on my end, I remember it was like one of the startups I was at, I won't name it, but like, we're presenting in front of like a pretty big client. And then, so there's like the CEO and there's the chief product officer. So they're in the meeting. I'm like relatively new, so I'm more like shadowing. And I was also in a sales engineer capacity. So, they're screen sharing. The chief product officer is, screen sharing, doing the presentation. And then, so one of the things what'll happen sometimes when you're presenting in front of a group is that there might be like an engineer or something who decides to just like ask questions just to like play like stump the chump. They're trying to like see if they can like, I don't know, throw like a curveball and kind of like trick you up or whatever. And then the CEO ends up like texting the product officer. He's like, hey man, like what the hell's up with this like a-hole or whatever, in some more like cultural language. And because he's screen sharing like his whole desktop, the iMessage thing like pops up in the corner, and it's like on like the projector, so everyone like sees it. And then long story short, they just continued, pretend like it didn't happen, but then obviously there was no second meeting in that case. So very important lesson: when you screen share, do not disturb. Very important. Like if you don't need internet access, just turn it off. And then another big thing that I've learned myself too is don't screen share your whole screen. There's a feature usually where you can screen share just the window. That's definitely saved me as well with like internal messages and everything. So very, very important, but it's one of those things where people usually learn the hard way. Luckily in this case, it wasn't like, it was just one of the deals. It was an early conversation, but it could definitely mess things up for sure.
I've had a lot of unmuted toilet flushes.
Oh yeah.
Like
yeah.
Post-COVID toilet flushes are famous.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, another thing I would recommend, is double mute. People don't realize you can double mute, especially if you use like an external like microphone. Like normally, like for like my conference calls, I have like a little desktop mic, and it actually has like a mute button on here. So I won't trust muting just on the app. 'Cause sometimes you just forget or like you accidentally unmute or something, and you're just like listening in while other people are presenting. So if you have like a secondary mic, you can use both, and it's just an extra safety feature. Yep. Good question here is where'd it go? Lots of cold calling goes into tech sales. How do you get leads at a company? So great question. This can vary quite a bit depending on the company. So some startups I've seen, they just have so much inbound traffic. They don't even have enough resources to do outbounding. They just have plenty of leads coming in because their product already has like really good traction in the marketplace. They got a ton of customers coming in. So you might not have any cold calling at all. And then on the flip side, you could have some customers that have like or some companies with zero market recognition, and it's essentially all outbound, all cold calling. So like the way that you get leads at a company, it varies. So there's in some roles, they might just tell you cover these states. It's up to you to basically build up the customer list and build up the contact list. You can use tools like LinkedIn Sales Navigator and Discover.org to build up those prospect lists. So you might have to even go from that completely from scratch, identify the companies. They'll usually give you some criteria that you can use to help like filter those things out. That's kind of like at the one extreme end. And then the other end would be you already have like a list of accounts that they know that they want you to break into. Like maybe you're more so like paired with individual account executives, and they know what accounts they need to break into. And they might already even have a list of contacts that they've identified. So then you're like working off of that list. And then the other lead source would be marketing leads. So marketing will ideally provide leads and information on like people that maybe attended webinars, downloaded white papers. So individuals that haven't directly asked to get contacted by sales, but they've already indicated some interest in the company. So those would be like the warm leads there. So that's kind of like a quick overview of like different things you might experience. And it's an excellent question to ask during the interview process. So during the interview process, for sure, there's a whole list of questions you should be asking, so that way you know exactly what you're getting into with the role, just to make sure it aligns well with your skills. Perfect. Current customer overage deals versus net new logos. What would sales leadership care more about? So when you say current customer overage deals, I assume that what you mean is like upselling on existing customers versus net new logos. I think it depends on like the stage of the company. I would imagine if it's like a hyper growth startup, a lot of the focus is on bringing on new customers and new logos. And then if they're more mature, nurturing those existing customers and upselling. It also kind of depends on like the products that you're selling, right? Do they have a very broad platform where there is the ability to do a land and expand approach versus like, just having one or two products? That's going to be very different too. So that's also a good question to ask for leadership. And usually they end up like aligning the sales comp plans to align with what leadership cares about. Usually those two are tied pretty closely together with like spiffs or additional bonuses based on like different metrics you might hit, like number of new logos.
I was just going to say, they're going to incentivize whatever they care about. So you can figure it out pretty quickly with the comp plan.
Yeah.
We had a saying at our old company, like, what are we trying to do? Mm-hmm. And the answer was everything. So sometimes you need to upsell, you need new logos, you need everything. Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Yep. And then, great point. And then one thing I always like to tell new sellers too, right, is definitely like understand the comp plan and understand all those like extra bonuses that you can get. For example, you don't need just hitting your quota is one way to earn money, but you can potentially find ways to like really earn a lot of extra money with like these additional programs and incentives. Like sometimes these bigger companies, they'll have like investment type programs where they'll fund like a pilot, or they'll fund like professional services funds or whatever to sell a very specific product for customers. And they could have specific bonuses there too. So very important to understand your comp plan. I've seen a lot of sales reps where they end up actually leaving a lot of money on the table because they don't realize that because they didn't tag their opportunities the right way in Salesforce and submit the right form, they missed out on a couple grand or whatever. Question here: could you explain accelerators versus spiffs versus bonus? So, do you want to take this one, JR?
Yeah, so accelerators happen when you hit after you hit quota. So, typically your quota is structured so you make a certain percentage of whatever your quota was. Say, it's $1 million and they're going to pay you 100K OTE on your variable comp. So you're getting paid, 10%. And basically what an accelerator would be, anything over $1 million, you make 20% instead. So your next $100,000 deal, instead of making 10 grand, you would make 20 grand. A bonus is typically, it's really based off of other like measured business outcomes, I think, probably. Bonus is more of a financial services term, I think, more than anything else, because I think of bonuses and spiffs is the same. A spiff is like, hey, this many low. It can be actually, against like, you hit your quota, but you also got 50 new logos. That could be a bonus or a spiff. And I guess spiffs are more like short competitions within a quarter, and bonuses are based off of other things they want to incentivize. Sell certain deals through a channel. AWS has probably more of those than probably any other company.
Yeah, like they're usually like, those will be like things also like if there's like a new product that they launched and they really want to incentivize the sellers to like be talking about that product with their customers, because what'll happen is sellers are like, they're focused on like hitting their quota and maximizing their pay. So, if they're already going to be hitting their number and there's this new product that comes out, they might not want to kind of complicate things and bring that in. And that's where you do like spiffs and bonuses to like, I guess, make things a bit more interesting and drive the seller behavior that way. Looking to land first tech sales SDR job. Do you think I should prioritize being on-site or remote? This is a great question. I have a pretty strong opinion on it. I think for your first role, if you're in one of the major tech hubs or close to it, you probably should be on-site. So a couple of reasons. One, you're going to get a lot more hands-on coaching and mentoring when you're in person. It's much easier for your like SDR manager just to like walk up to you, or you to walk up to their desk and ask them a question. You can still, you can kind of do that virtually. It is a lot more difficult to do that. It's going to be a lot easier for you to develop relationships with your coworkers, and then also to like network internally within the company. I would say like at least like the first year or two is definitely good to have all that FaceTime, and then once you're kind of like known within the company, that's when you could kind of like go remote or at that point. But early on, for sure, you're going to benefit quite a bit. You're going to learn a lot more, and it's also just it's going to be more it's going to be a bit more motivating when you have all the other reps around you and you're talking about your deals and everything. You're going to see people grinding and working at it, and it's going to be more motivating for you too. I mean, me personally, being mostly remote for the past 2 years, it's a pretty big difference in terms of like the motivating factors of like being at home mostly, working remotely, occasionally traveling, versus like always being around like your other sales peers. I'm assuming you probably maybe think something along the same lines, JR.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think nowadays you're starting to see companies that are all remote, and they are really good about making sure that you can still learn and connect with your peers, right? So if you are going to go to a remote company, and there's some great ones out there, you should understand how they're bridging the gap on development and on culture. 100%, because some companies are getting really, really good at it. But I think generally, as like a general statement, if you're in a major city and you can go work in an office, that's great. But it depends on the company.
Yeah, it depends on the company, and also personal circumstances can be different too. So obviously you got to weigh those things as well. But overall, I think especially on the sales side, I think you benefit from it. Maybe a little bit different on like software development or something. We'll do just a couple more. I'm just going to go a little bit over because I think there was just a little bit of that downtime in the middle of the stream. But Do you wear suits? You feel like it'd be a good confidence boost on a call? I don't wear suits too often anymore. I'll wear them like, it depends on the customer that I'm meeting. Like if I'm selling to like a startup, I'm not going to show up in like a full suit because you don't usually want to be on the same level as your customer. But it doesn't hurt to like overdress. What you want to avoid is like underdressing for the most part. And then when you're selling, like I've sold to like banks and credit unions, financial services, they're all wearing suits, so you come into that. But for remote work, I would say, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a bit of a confidence booster. If you want to actually still have a normal morning routine, shower, get dressed, keep up with grooming and everything, that definitely helps with that, especially like if you're going to be like on video with customers. And you don't have to like do the full suit either if you want. You can literally just throw on a dress shirt and still wear sweatpants, but the routine I think is important there. And then you want to take this one, JR. Who's on the other line when you're calling leads? Is it CEOs?
It depends on the product you're selling. It depends on the problem that you solve, how big you solve it, how big that problem is, and what type of influence and the size of the deal that you need to make. Right. Mm-hmm. There's very few softwares out there that if you're selling into, mid-market or enterprise, SMB is a little different. I can't really speak to that. Mm-hmm. I haven't sold SMB. But when you're selling into commercial and enterprise accounts, even if you're selling a seven-figure software, you're typically you don't have to get to the CEO. You might need to get to the C-level, like the CIO or the CFO or something like that. Typically, you're not calling the CEO. You're really, the way I think about software is people spend 6 figures to solve 7-figure problems. Mm-hmm. People spend 8 figures to solve 7-figure problems, and so forth and so on. So, if you have a solution that's an 8-figure solution, which I've sold a lot of 8-figure deals, you are going to most likely end up at the C level, but that's only because you're probably solving like mm-hmm. a very significant problem for the company, and it's going to help you with your deal. But calling CEOs is very, very rare unless you're selling an SMB software to like, a 30-person company.
Yeah. You have to imagine like CEOs, they get a ton of messages, a ton of, LinkedIn messages, emails, and so on. And usually they even have like EAs that are filtering through all that stuff. So, great question. So I think we're gonna wrap this up. So this was a great session. So just to kind of summarize for the people that joined a little bit later. So this was a special weekly live with Shift Group. So they work specifically with athletes to coach, mentor, and train and get them placed in top tech sales organizations. So J.R. Butler, he's the founder. So great. It was great chatting with you today. This live is being recorded, and I'm going to post it on the YouTube channel as well. That's where I post all of the recorded TikTok lives. So that's just at TechSalesTom.com, and then you click on the little YouTube logo. That'll take you straight there. And then if you have any other questions, either for me or for JR, feel free to reach out. I'm usually most responsive on Instagram. Shift Group's on Instagram as well. I also have the link to Shift Group within my bio as well. So if you are interested, and if you are an athlete and you want to explore tech sales, go ahead and go through the link. You can fill it out, and there's a little referral section and everything. So if you found the live session helpful, you can put down TechSalesTom as that referral there. But they'll go through, they'll set up a call. They have a whole team to go ahead and do that. And then again, if you have any other questions, definitely feel free to reach out to either of us. And I've got a ton of other videos as well about tech sales if you wanna learn more. And then we'll actually be doing this live session again next week as well. So looking forward to continuing this one again.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.